The committee of the whole is called to order, but we will continue to recess until we have a quorum. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're back from recess. The next amendment is SB 276 JCM1 L11 P149. That's line 11, page 149, introduced by Senator Jim Moylan with several co-sponsors. Section 40, renovations of the Guam Memorial Hospital's Labor and Delivery Ward. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we started our budget hearing this earlier the other week there, we had the opportunity to have the governor's fiscal team in front of us, and we were looking at the projected surplus upon the audit when that's going to be completed for fiscal year 2022's fund balance. And as we've grown in our discussion of how this money can be used and what amount is actually there, we can probably agree to disagree on how much the projections may be, or if there may even be a fund balance, as we can see based on the other amendments that have been made ahead of this. But the reality is, if the funds are truly available and even remotely close to what our budget advisors are indicating, then that's what this amendment is about. It's our responsibility of this body and to identify the priorities for where these funds can be earmarked. So this amendment is pretty straightforward, and of course it regards the renovation of the labor and delivery ward of the Guam Memorial Hospital. And I appreciate the co-sponsors along with me, Senator Nelson, Senator St. Augustine, and yourself, sir, and as well as Senator Duenas. So rather than getting into too much of the details of the politics of why this labor and delivery ward has not been renovated for this long, instead I would like to encourage my colleagues to basically support this amendment that would authorize up to $10 million for the renovations of the Guam Memorial Hospital Labor and Delivery Ward. We know it's long overdue and that the hospital has spent monies in previous years to find and design the facility, as mentioned when we had the committee here. Previously there was the USDA loan, and that's a financial option too, but we do have a fund balance, and this bill is talking about the audited fund balance, and it says no more than $10 million. So what balance that is, we won't know until the audit report is projected or provided. But we could find something and we could offer them a solution. So that's what I'm recommending to my colleagues. Let's utilize up to $10 million to provide to the Guam Memorial Hospital for the renovation of the labor and delivery ward on the audited revenues of the fund balance of fiscal year 2022. So I thank my colleagues for their support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment, Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, and I certainly rise in support of this amendment. You know, on a couple of different occasions, Mr. Chairman, I've begun supporting amendments that we have provided for with the unaudited budget surplus of fiscal year 2022. And at least on one occasion, maybe two, I've mentioned that one of the reasons why we're here and squeezing revenue from the unaudited 2022 projected surplus as per the CRER is because this body had been asked at least twice to use general fund appropriations for projects that we believe and programs that could have been funded by ARP. You know, my good friend Senator Blas and the chairman, Senator St. Augustine. Before LEAP even came into existence, there was several meetings with the business community months and months ago on how businesses were suffering, and even some of the federal CARES Act and some of the additional pandemic relief, and even the PPE and some of these things, that the monies weren't trickling all the way down to some of the other key businesses that either weren't eligible because of shuttering requirements or anything. And I say this, Mr. Chairman, because when the LEAP program was put forward, it was like, well, we'll put $25 million up in ARP, but we want the legislature to appropriate $25 million. After some back and forth, Mr. Chairman, okay, we're not going to leave them out to dry. We're not going to acquiesce on our part, although we disagree. So we did it. Fortunately, we didn't have to match the additional $8 million. We didn't have to put another 4 in that pot. I guess the thought process was a little bit more generosity might go a long way. And we made to understand now that the LEAP program, at least for its current inception, has gone up to $68 million. But $25 million came from the unaudited 2022 funds. Then there was this great idea, which is a great idea, for relief on the power bills. There's another $25 million. After much debate and back and forth, and once again, we even said that on the floor during that time, that our neighbors to the north have found a creative way of being able to use that fund, and they did. They did. After our program, they rolled out a credit program for power using ARP. But once again, do we abrogate our responsibility? Do we stand and cut off our nose to spite our face and say, no, we don't? We rose to the occasion. The people need it. We're going to use local funds. We'll use local funds if we have to. All the time, hundreds of millions of dollars sits in ARP funding. I use this example, Mr. Chairman, primarily and fundamentally because one of the greatest successes of our hospital, in fact, has been recognized nationally, was the alacrity to which they went in and reconfigured the majority of their wards to make sure that they could get ready for the war against COVID. And all of those funds were easily accessible. All the meanwhile, during the discussion when we had GMH down here for other proposals, we even heard from the executive director that we would be doomed if that electrical panel goes down. Now, I'm not an engineer, don't have a degree in engineering, I'm not an electrical expert. I've built a couple houses. I know one thing, you can have all the greatest amenities in your home, but if you don't have a power panel to distribute power, you got a problem. Now, we only have to go back and look and see that, because this is one of the reasons that's been put forward, that let's get our priorities in order. Back in 2018, there was a major back and forth. And subsequent to that, when the discussion was finished on the Army Corps' presentation of, you don't rebuild this hospital, build a new hospital, a bunch of us jumped on board. Okay, so what are we going to do in the meantime? A list to include the electrical panel, the envelope for the roof, stop the leaking, all those things were identified. As a matter of fact, as I said to the GMH administrator and the members that were here, we got good news for you, because we even discovered there's actually your 10 million appropriation that was made by this body prior is still active and available. So if you got a problem with electrical panel and you only got to throw another 5 million to it, you could do it right now because you have $10 million in appropriation authority. I list all these things, Mr. Chairman, because I guess it's going to be a battle of differences until the day that the last penny of ARP is paid on what you can use the money for. And I know, I don't need to be reminded, this body's got no control over those funds. I know, and I'm not going to try. I'm not going to de-appropriate local funds or whatever else and play chicken. But I will bring it up every time. Because it doesn't make sense to me that we sit here and talk about the fact that we've gotten authority to set aside $300 million, which is probably $180 million now that we've heard, of ARP money to build a new hospital, all the while a hospital sits up there and needs all these repairs. And we've demonstrated we used ARP to refurb that hospital to make sure that it's a COVID center that could handle surges. But you're not going to handle a surge if you don't fix your panel. As I close on the support for this amendment, Mr. Chairman, this amendment to me is more about identifying a priority than it is about irresponsible spending because it's the audited financials. As far as I'm concerned, the other appropriations are more of a guess than anything else. Does this mean, well, is it not a priority because the project will only start in June when the audit comes out, hopefully on time? No, it doesn't. Because if it becomes a priority before then, at least you have something on the books that you can amend quickly and make it happen. I, for one, have watched enough videos. I, for one, have heard enough from people. I, for one, have heard enough from mothers who have endured the difficulty of bearing a child in those conditions, albeit great doctors, great nurses, everybody dedicated to the cause, but something that is below, at this time, in this day and age, the dignity of a place for a mother to bear her child. So with that, as I close, Mr. Chairman, for me, this is simply about making a statement about a priority. I would hope that it would be a call to action, and I would pray, and I hope this amendment is supported and can pass on the floor. Sijus Masi, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. On the amendment. Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So GMH, overall in their FY2023 budget in this sub-bill is getting an appropriation that is $3.9 million more than last year's budget, the FY22. And they've also going to be receiving $5 million for specialists from this same funding source due to an earlier amendment. And at the end of FY22, through that last GPA bill, we also added $3.1 million to the pharmaceutical fund for them to use. And so all of that, I think, shows our consistent efforts to try to give to GMH to assist them to upgrade the hospital and the programs that are available and services that are available to the people of Guam. But of course, much can be done. Much more can be done. So I support the efforts to upgrade the GMH labor and delivery ward, just as I've always supported the critical upgrades and repairs needed to make the hospital's roof not leak, to repair the electrical panel and move that electrical panel so it's not a fire hazard, to the hospital's HVAC system that is hospital-wide, the electronic health records that they claim was imperative and critical to better reviews by CMS because of better communication, better record keeping between doctors, nurses, patients. I mean, every contact with that patient would be recorded. It would also supposed to help them with revenue collection because of the bills that they were able to create. All of these critical improvements were also listed in the Army Corps of Engineers 2019 assessment. And that Army Corps assessment really prioritized and made it very clear for any doubters that these repairs needed to be done in order for the hospital to continue, even if we are going to build a new hospital, that we needed to do these critical repairs in order to provide services for the next 5 years, which was the lowest estimate of time that it would take to build a new hospital. So GMH's FY23 budget request, their request to us, did not include any request to fund capital improvements or renovations specifically for the labor and delivery ward. There are requests for various medical equipment needed based on the Army Corps of Engineers assessment, comprehensive list of medical equipment beyond useful life that is needed for all hazards and emergency management. So some of that equipment is very specific to the labor and delivery wards and to the NICU, the neonatal intensive care. So Administrator Posadas and the Operations Administrator William Kando, when they were in here, stated for the record that the proposed funding for the renovations of the labor and delivery ward would definitely help, but also re-emphasize the critical areas throughout the hospital that needed repair and replacement. So when I asked the Administrator Posadas where her priority for the funding would be, she stated, and I'm quoting, "As the administrator of the hospital, my responsibility is not just to one area of the hospital, but the entire hospital. Really, what's going to benefit the hospital is the electrical panel, the infrastructure, the IT that we're challenged with. If that electrical panel goes out, then that's it. We're doomed," unquote. So I'm proposing an amendment to this labor and delivery ward appropriation that would give GMH the flexibility to use the proposed $10 million from audited surplus revenues to also address those critical CIP projects. It would require that the funding be deposited into the Hospital Capital Improvement Fund, which was established previously in Public Law 35-36, or the FY2020 Budget Act. And it would allow for the it would allow that the funds may be used for priority capital improvement projects authorized in Public Law 35-73 or for the purposes of the renovations of the Guam Memorial Hospital Labor and Delivery Ward. And the capital improvement projects authorized in Public Law 35-73 are those that were mentioned by the administrator, and they include to repair or replace the electrical panel and necessary generator, to repair the roof, to procure an electronic health record system. And so she has said that 2 of these are already addressed, and it's the electrical panel that needs. This gives them the flexibility in reality to address that electrical panel if it is urgent, and also to address the labor and delivery ward, which we see to be also very necessary. And of course, as we said earlier, we would like the babies that are coming into this world to come into an ideal environment. And the more we can improve the conditions for mothers and babies, I think better for our entire community. And that's, a big part of that is, at the hospital. But again, I do think we should acknowledge the critical, urgent needs of the hospital as well. So I believe this is a win-win situation if we can allow them that flexibility, Mr. Chair. So that's my amendment to this amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Tadigui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand in full support as a co-sponsor of this amendment to the amendment. I think the comments that were made by the hospital is clear to us what the priority is right now. But the concern too about ensuring that the labor and delivery room also has a fair shake. I think I'd like to remind my colleagues exactly, while improving the facilities and condition at Guam Memorial Hospital, also the labor and delivery, Public Law 32-204 was enacted in October of 2014, which authorizes GITA and the Governor's Office to arrange a line of credit, a revolving loan fund, and/or a direct loan in amount not to exceed $7 million to fund repairs to the labor and delivery ward. Then Public Law 33-151 was also approved in 2016, increasing the finance amount to $9.2 million. This also authorized the privatization of the labor and delivery ward operations or facilities. Well, according to local media report, as of January 2018, the USDA agreed to fund renovations to the labor and delivery ward, but the agency required Guam to get a loan first. GITA reported at the time that the negotiations with the Bank of Guam required Gov Guam to make assurance on the sole amount of a full 4% BPT, which of course is not authorized by law, made it very difficult to get this loan. If we had gotten this loan, the USDA would come back to help and agree to fund it, to fund the loan. But unfortunately, the request from this bank asking for 4% BPT, well, we all know that 3% of that BPT is covered by covenants, bonded by covenants. But then after 2018, the opportunity again in 2018 and then 19, the opportunity is still there, and it's still there today. The ability to fund the labor and delivery ward is still on the table today. Unfortunately, when we heard from the panel from Guam Memorial Hospital, they were unable to secure federal funds for the panel. They did their due diligence. They went out, tried to seek for federal funds, a loan to pay for it, but they were denied. The grant they were going after was very competitive. So now they have to come to us for this. A very critical part of the hospital. I know that we had set aside in excess FY2019 excess revenue was set aside for $10 million for the hospital. And to this day, they have not received it. But I was told that the excess revenue for FY2019 has already been expended. So if we're anticipating them to still get that $10 million, it's going to be very difficult unless it can carry over to the next excess year, or FY2020 or 2021. But I think the law is clear on which excess to be used. The point is that The Army Corps of Engineers as well issued a report in April in 2020. To build a new hospital would have been $743 million. To renovate the existing GMH facility is $761 million to renovate it. At this point, Mr. Chair, we have to do something because this new hospital that I know our governor wants to build, it's going to take at least 3 years to 4 years, maybe even 5 years before it's done. But in the meantime, we have to do something because we still have patients going to our hospital to get care. And most especially our hard-working hospital staff that's there that care for those patients should not be working in an environment that's unsafe. One of the issues, the biggest issues, is the generator that they want to put in place and at the hospital. It needs to be totally replaced, not fixed, but totally replaced, has to be moved to a different area because just next to it is their water tank. And that is violating code, building code. You know, I just think that we need to put our priorities straight here. I mean, nobody is here as, saying that they don't want anything else to be fixed at Guam Memorial Hospital. The labor ward, Z wing, A and B wing, that's also on the Army Corps of Engineers list. But we got to start somewhere. And I really appreciate what the speaker had mentioned earlier, the quoting what Lillian said, which was in my responsibility of the whole hospital, it will be the electrical panel because that's going to benefit the whole hospital and not just one section. So I stand in full support of this amendment as a co-sponsor and appreciate the good speaker for allowing me to be a part of that. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also rise in support of this amendment. I think primarily because, the irony, I have to tell you, if this whole situation is, this administration has always advertised that their priority, because the governor is a nurse, is health care. And it's really strange at this stage in the year of 2022 of August, the end of this month. We're talking about, loans that were passed some time ago, the authorization to pursue addressing these issues, and yet several years later, we still don't see that. A lot of the things that GMH relayed the other day when they were here, and I appreciate them coming down at short notice. I mean, I was aware of, during the last year of the Calvo Tenorio administration, when I was asked to go up and assist the hospital with some of these issues, when the legislature was giving them a hard time on just basic repairs and funding that they need to operate. How ironic, huh? How interesting. And yet, it seems like these issues have not been addressed. So much attention, focus has been placed on the new hospital, the new wonderful hospital that we're going to build, that we're going to attach everything under the sun to, and everything has to be next to each other because, this is what ultimately the people of Guam need. We want to give them, the best, the center of excellence, as they call it. And yet right now, we have facilities up there that our people need services from, and we're still not at an acceptable standard. We still have repairs, and granted, I'm happy to see the progress that they're making. I'm happy to see, the Z-wing come down because that particular structure, just in terms of safety, needed to be demolished. But while we're tripping over each other, because so much of this illusion that we want to create to our people to make it seem like we're so caring. I mean, please, all the mothers that have given birth at GMH, please stand up and be counted. I don't see any of the sponsors unless I'm wrong. Did any of them give birth at GMH? Have they been in the labor delivery ward giving birth to a child? Well, not you in particular. But I'm sure for all those that are mothers, that have given birth to children, that will be mothers or will be mothers again because we're having more children, of course, we all want a safe environment for them. There's no argument about the need. I mean, that's the most basic need. We want a safe, sanitized, clean environment where mothers can give birth, because that can sometimes be a very challenging situation for both the baby and the mother if they don't have the medical facilities and resources and expertise of these doctors and nurses and support staff that are involved in the process of bringing these children safely into the world. So there's no argument there. I don't know who anyone here can think they're the champion of that. I'm sure the mothers of Guam are more the champions of that. But it shows the reality that we are even here discussing this, because this was supposed to be a big priority of the administration to address health care, and yet here we are dealing with issues that, gosh, it could have been just yesterday. And here we are at the twilight hour of this budget where there's a sense of anxiousness because, the clock is running out here to get a budget passed, and now all of a sudden we're gonna go in there and rescue the day. Because, we found more money and we're gonna throw it at the problem because that's gonna resolve everything. And we do it in a way where, yes, we have them come in and answer some questions, but is that how we vet these critical issues, especially things that need substantial funding that we're running out of? And at the rate some of our colleagues want to burn the money, wow, we're going to be short. And there are going to be other issues that are going to crop up that we are going to say are critical and important in this community. I mean, look at DOE. We're finding out they've taken money that was intended to address critical infrastructure in the schools for the safety and welfare of our children. And, politically, we need a pay raise. We need a pay raise a couple months before an election. That's what's bothersome. We should be responsible in how we appropriate these funds because they are precious and critical. And they're not going to be there a year or two from now. We're not going to be sitting handing just, we got money, let's hand, there's another 2003, let's just grab it all together and keep appropriating so we can take credit for it. And then we wonder why our people look at us and just sometimes in disgust, and Tatlu, Mandagi, Tatlu, those senators, the same old, same old. Doesn't matter who's here, whose name is here, whose name is not, same old. And yet, is their quality of life any better now that they got $1 billion+ budget? Is there anything in the government they feel they're really getting better service, better sense of security in their government from all that we are spending supposedly on their behalf and in their good interests, because we want to take credit for it when we've really done no heavy. Mr. Chairman, the ability to write an amendment in a bill is so easy. And yet the heavy lifting that's involved in making sure, are we doing the right thing? Are we putting the money where we really need it? Because politically, there's other interests playing into this game. Let's not kid ourselves. We need to be responsible with how we make decisions. And colleagues, sure, go ahead, do what you're going to do. There'll be a new legislature in a few months. We'll probably go in a different direction. But that's not responsible. I mean, we should be responsible in how we spend the people's money. So while I'm not crazy about all these last-minute infusions of these substantially high amounts of appropriations of what we believe will be left, I have no argument about the need to assist the Guam Memorial Hospital. And certainly for them to be able to come back and definitely account and justify for how funds are being spent so that we ensure, again, I repeat this often enough, we ensure it's actually being spent in the interest of our people. And if they're coming and telling us, and I do know because I was up at GMH when we had a situation of an electrical fire that affected the electrical panel that they're talking about. And they are literally band-aiding this whole situation with the assistance, thank goodness, of the Guam Power Authority to keep this running because it is such a high-priced item. It is such a high-priced item. And we agree. We just recently all went through the roaming power outages. We thought those days were over. And here we are back to roaming power outages. I mean, we know if we don't have a backup battery system or something, another generator in your house, or now we have these battery packs you can use now to keep things operating, a lot of things come to a standstill. And I concur with their position at GMH. When power goes out, everything goes down. So what is the most critical? Do we determine that it's labor and delivery because, that's the most important thing? I'm sure it's important. But I think giving the Guam Memorial Hospital, by all means, I mean, you give them the funds, I expect them to be held accountable for how they spend these funds. If it's determined that the most critical need at GMH right now is that same old, gosh, here we are 4 years later in this administration, that same old electrical panel is still a problem. And we can take all this federal money that the governor just hoards onto, that she has it's my money. She has the authority to hold on to this money. She's not investing it in the electrical panel. If healthcare is so important, why isn't GMH up and running well? Why do we keep hearing these issues, these piecemeal pieces of legislation that come knocking on our door? You got to ask yourself, I'm sure our people are asking themselves those questions, because this is a very old issue. And I think we should, because I think they're more in a position to determine what is the critical need of that facility. And if it is the electrical panel and that's what's needed, then if that's the foundation they need to build on, then by all means, let's get it addressed. I have seen the water tank that's within a matter of feet of their generator and their electrical system there at GMH. And that's the first question I asked. I'm no engineer, I'm no electrician, but you know what? I think, electricity and water don't mix very well. And I don't know why it was designed like that. I don't know if that's the only footprint in the building they had to put it, but not this person with the smartest mind put that together. And if it goes down, oh my goodness, imagine the consequences. So by all means, we need to address that, because that hospital is going to need to run, maybe for the next few years. Maybe a new hospital will get built. I'm just surprised. Years ago, we were told the private hospital was going to be the ultimate solution, and now we don't hear anything about them. I guess they're not part of the family these days. You don't hear much about them in relation to our collective health care system these days. But that hospital needs to be kept in good quality running order till the time comes that we determine it's no longer going to be a facility. Because I'll tell you, if the administration changes the plans for where and how and when this new hospital is going to be built, will probably change. Policy will change here in the legislature when there are new and different people here making those decisions. So I rise in support of this amendment. I think we should leave it to GMH, of course with our oversight, to determine where the most critical need is up there to keep that facility operating and in good working order for the use and need of our people. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Duenas.
Mr. Chairman, I want to listen to the further discussion on the amendment to the amendment, but I just wanted to make an observation. On April 24th, 1985, while I was sitting beside the mother of my son, the greatest event that ever happened in my life, I did experience that GMH labor and delivery room. And at that time, it was a modern facility, well kept, everything worked. And thanks to that wonderful labor and delivery room, next month I'll be celebrating another milestone with the greatest thing that ever happened to my life. That young man who was born in that hospital will be getting married. So I just wanted to share that on the record.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The amendment is, what is added is that no more than $10 million from audited surplus revenues from the fund balance of fiscal year 2022 shall be deposited into the Hospital Capital Improvement Fund and may be used for priority capital improvement projects authorized in Public Law 35-73 for the purposes or for the purposes of the renovations of the Guam Memorial Hospital Labor and Delivery Ward, GMHA Maternal and Child Health Care Renovation Project. So, Mr. Chair, this is not an unreasonable amendment. I think that what we're not talking about is a lot of the infighting that's going on in the hospital and a lot of the conflicting interests between the professionals that work there. And this is what makes it a challenge for us to move forward, is because no one wants to be able to compromise. No one wants to be able to sit at a table and discuss the challenges and work through their egos to make things happen. That's the problem, why we're never able to move forward. It's all about ego. And here, this is a reasonable amendment that's giving us also still the option to ensure that the hospital and labor and delivery ward is also an option. It's not crossing out the labor and delivery ward. It's actually an inclusion of that and the many challenges the hospitals face. So I rise in support of this, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment to the amendment, Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the discussion and the amendment, and my colleagues' comments. It's interesting, and I understand the urgency that they placed on having this panel replaced. And in the 35th, we introduced a bill, which is what we do here to the best of our ability, to include $6 million to address that panel. Didn't get anywhere. That was Bill 179. And then also in the 35th, another measure, which we do here, is $10 million for repairs and CIP programs for the hospital, which 288 didn't get far, but we were able to discuss it during an important time like we're discussing it now in the budget. We were able to input that into the budget. So if you can't get it one way, you work it another way. And the best time to do that is while you're discussing the budget. And that's what we're talking about here today. The panel was not even part of the administration or the executive budget proposed to the legislature. But now, when we had the possibility of funding L&D, now it's important once again. The bill, the way it's written, is on audited funds. That audit doesn't come across until summer of next year. This isn't really going to help them if they need this tomorrow. We're talking about needing this tonight, or any time this could happen. If we want to make the argument that the money is necessary and it's important, then the argument should be to the governor and saying, use those ARP funds today. But we heard from the administrator that maybe she'll discuss this with DOA to see how we can work that out. I can't see the urgency in asking for audited funds. And by the way, when that audit is completed, there may not be any funds. So, and the figure on this bill is up to $10 million. Maybe there will be. We don't know. But we can't guarantee them if there's such a big sense of urgency to do it now. You know what you can do now is you can move the freaking water tank. That's easier than replacing a whole panel. And by the way, when GPA went up there to address after the Corps of Engineers report, they removed the box, the panel box, and they took out those fuses, not the fuses, but the connections there, and they took off 40 years of dust. Then they put it back in, and now they have a preventive maintenance, which they do semi-annual or annual reports for. GPA, I plan to get those reports, but GPA would tell them, look, you're not going to have lights tomorrow unless you do this. And if that was the case, they wouldn't be sitting here in front of us telling it's important that we get this, coming to us to use audited funds that's not available until next summer, not knowing what money is going to be available then. So you know, it's just kind of awkward. And I can understand that we want to help the administrator of the hospital to have control to do those fundings to prioritize different things. Because the thing is, it's falling apart. If your ship is sinking, before you fix your sink, you better fix your hole. But when we put the word "or" in here, we know this administration, it is not their priority to do the L&D. Right? Where my 2 children were born. So I wish our argument could be more towards the governor, this administration using ARPA funds that she told the governors of the United States that the legislature can't touch. But now that her administrator is saying it's important once again, and that she's willing to wait till next summer, then really help out your hospital. Because I don't see the focus of this administration doing something good where there are, as the administrator has told us, are over 260 some average monthly births of revenue generating business for the hospital, of children that are born there, yours, mine, and grandkids, congratulations there, Senator, that will be born there. And the amount of revenue generated for the hospital to be in a place where doctors will want to come to work instead of wanting to wash their hands before, after, and during while they're inside doing their procedures. The panel has preventive maintenance being done on it by GPA. So we're addressing it. And I'm comfortable with how the original amendment was submitted. So therefore, Mr. Chairman, I object to this amendment. I can understand my colleagues' concerns and wanting to compromise, but I don't believe the administration will do anything it seems like they've done what they thought they can have done to the best of their ability to do for now. When we had $1 million plans that were previously submitted. When we've been talking about this, at least in my history, short term it may seem to others, but long enough term for me, in the 35th to offer the fixtures back then. So my objection is, if you want that panel box that GPA is saying still works, done tomorrow, then use ARPA funds. And let's focus back on labor and delivery. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment to the amendment.
Just a point of inquiry, Mr. Chair. Last week we had the panel here, and I thought, if I can recall correctly, that Lillian Pasadas did say that they were not able to avail to those funds, and it was requested, and there was specific language that showed the hospital that they could not use those funds, the federal funds.
Thank you, Senator Nelson.
Point
On the amendment,
of information, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moylan.
I heard that comment as well, and in the final instructions for the ARP funding, it did not include building a new hospital, but yet through explanation of this administration, they were able to get, so I see, the approval to build a new hospital. If you can build a new hospital with ARPA funds, you can fix the panel with ARPA funds as well, and show that the increase in utilization of the hospital is due to COVID, and then they can justify it. You can do anything you want with the right wording, I believe that. And if it's the right thing to do, they would have done it to themselves, but they haven't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Point
Senator
of
Moylan.
information, Mr. Chair.
Senator Nelson.
That's clear speculation. It's not fact, it's his opinion.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment to the amendment. Speaker Chalahi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their input on this amendment. And I know, I agree. If there's another funding source for critical repairs at the hospital, absolutely, it should be used. And the fact that it hasn't been used, and this project has been on the most urgent CIP list of the hospital for at least, I want to say 3, maybe 4, maybe even 5 years. But for sure, it has been one of the top 3 projects as long as I've been the Health Care Committee chairperson, because we always ask them in their budget, what about CIP? Why aren't you asking for CIP funds, right? And they always say, we're able to take care of those so far with other sources. And yeah, so those are very good points and very good questions, that if there is another source available and this is such a critical need, then why isn't it done? And especially the way they described it, that if that electrical panel goes out, then that's it. We're doomed. We're doomed. Not just us. The people of Guam, those babies in the maternity ward, everyone. I mean, that is, I don't even, if you think too long about those kind of statements, you just think it's unconscionable, right? That kind of critical need is going to go unaddressed this long. And this is just, maybe another example of, we've tried to put money there. They don't request money there. They've, tried other sources, but I agree. If the governor is able to put money there immediately, then that's exactly what should be done. We should not wait for the audit to be completed at the end of fiscal year 2022, and we've seen the audit for fiscal year 2021 has taken an entire year, right? We don't even have it yet. Well, I think we just got it this month, and it's August. So the fiscal year ends in September, right? So if they're going to wait that long, then of course it's just not being treated like a critical need. But I just think it would be incumbent on us to make it available, to make sure that we have done everything we can, and that we show by this amendment that we care about critical needs, and we care to give this administration at the hospital the tools and the power that they need to address critical needs, and that there should be no excuse why those critical needs are not met. And we tried in the past as well to give them $10 million years ago to address these exact same critical needs. But of course, if they are able to address it with other funding, and they're able to get this maternity ward fixed for the interim, in the interim hospital, it's a win-win. And I just want to point out to my colleagues that this fund that we're putting the money into, it is a safeguarded fund without transfer authority. None of the money can be transferred out or used for any other purpose. So I want to thank my colleagues in advance for their support. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment to the amendment, there has been an objection. All those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries. Now on the main amendment, as amended. Senator Blas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I sat back and, colleagues, I asked, let's listen to ourselves over the last 30 days. Maternity ward needs repairs. Panels needs replacement. Water tank needs to be moved. Leaky roofs. Suicide ideation. Rising crime. And we struggled collectively amongst ourselves to be able to try to find, the nickel by squeezing the 2 pennies to deal with a lot of these issues. That quite honestly, I'm surprised that for us to boast that we've got over $3.6 billion in funding for the last 2 years that these issues exist. I sat here over the last hour listening to us arguing over how we're going to be able to utilize about up to $10 million of funds that we anticipate and we think we're going to be able to get as a result of an audit to be able to try to fix something that needs fixing today. And we shouldn't be having these arguments. Not with the $3.6 billion that we boast that we have to get us out of the doldrums that we're in. I find myself having to support this amendment because you know what? It's the best that we can do with what we got. Despite the fact that, if I remember very correctly, about 2 years ago or about a year ago, we were asked to come and sit down and to talk about collectively how we can best spend funding that we're to receive, only to be said, thank you very much for your listing, I'll take care of this, I'm all on my own. That should have been the writing on the wall then. I mean, it is writing on the wall. And now we're sitting in here and we're fighting for the crumbs that were swept off the table. Colleagues, do you realize that as we were arguing about this, there's about $300 million sitting in an account that could be used for this? Just want to remind everybody. I want to remind the people of Guam. You know, so I applaud each and every one of you, each and every one of us in here, for trying to make a difference with what we are able to make a difference with. While somebody sits back and just says, I'm going to save my money so that I can build the things I want to build. Okay? That's what it's come down to, and that's sad. I support this amendment. You know, with what we got, that's the best we can do. But it could be better. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. On the amendment as amended.
Mr. Chair, I believe I have an amendment.
Senator Nelson.
That was sent to the clerks. Can we take a quick recess?
Sure, but I think while we wait for that, Senator San Augustine, did you have something?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to comment, co-sponsor of the amendment, but the changes, my colleagues, all I want to say is that, yeah, we could have done better. We could have done better yesterday. Could have done better last week. We're talking about audited surplus money funds. That was not the concern then. But sure, we've done what we could with what we have. With that, we'll just move on with the amendment and we'll figure it out where we're going to go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. We'll take a short recess. Senator Nelson has an amendment to the amendment that will be passed around. We'll take a moment's recess. Okay, we are back from recess. The amendment to the amendment has been passed out. This amendment has been proffered by Senator Nelson. Senator
you.
Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to add $5 million to the amount of the amendment. So the amendment reads, currently no more than $10 million. This is to add $5 million, so there'll be $15 million from audited surplus revenues from the fund balance of fiscal year 2022 and shall be deposited into the Hospital Capital Improvement Fund and may be used for priority capital improvement projects authorized in Public Law 35-73 or for the purposes of the renovations of the Guam Memorial Hospital Labor and Delivery Ward, GMHA Maternal and Child Health Care Renovation Project. And so, Mr. Chair, we understand that several years back, the original cost for the renovation of the labor and delivery ward was in the amount of maybe like $9 million. As time has progressed, that cost has increased. And so now their estimated cost would be about $13 to $15 million. And so to ensure that we give the trust to those, the administrators of the hospital, to show that we are also ensuring that we would like you to focus on the labor and delivery ward, I'm requesting to add another $5 million to make it $15 million so that they have the ability to focus on the labor and delivery ward and whatever CIP projects, whichever they choose on their discernment. So colleagues, I humbly ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment. Senator Titlery.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as we heard from the panel themselves, they spoke about going after a federal grant in the amount of $15 million, you know, to go after the for the electrical panel, as well as the sub panel and the generator. But then it was also brought to our attention, it was about $12.5 million that Lillian mentioned the cost would be. But I think when Mr. Canto was explaining to us, it was actually closer to $15 million. My question would be, you know, to OFB actually at this point, Mr. Chair, the running balance that we have right now. I'm pretty sure he was about to get that question. I mean, I'm keeping my balance, my running balance, and if we do take that additional $5 million, what I'm coming up with is left over is only $3 million from the additional $24 million in surplus for the July CRER report that showed additional 24. And then after all the amendments that we had made so far, Mr. Chair, the sewer grant at $2 million, ancestral lands at $90,000, OPA at $371,000, water conservation at $100,000. The additional shortfall that was not anticipated at $1.6 million in the special funds. The cannabis agricultural one was $400,000. Slaughterhouse at $600,000. GMH specialist was $5 million. And then now, if this bill were to pass at $10 million as original, we have a total of $20,161,000, which leaves us a balance of $8 million. Right now, about $8 million and some change. So this will now, if we add the $5 million, it will leave us at only $3 million left in surplus. Now those are my numbers, but you know, I'm sure everybody wants to hear from OFB, and then we should. So if we can get OFB to give us a running balance, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Titlery. I believe OFB Chair is looking for that information. Anyone else on the amendment while the OFB Chair... anyone else on the amendment? Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Moreland, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the sponsor's intent for additional monies to help Guam Memorial Hospital on the capital improvements and or the renovation of Guam Memorial Hospital, and giving the authority to GMH Administrator to figure that out. However, 15 is nice. I prefer not to increase it too much. And of course, the amendment does say no more than, and I'm glad it's still based on audited surplus revenues, which is good. But I think the 10 can do it, and still going back to my original argument on previous amendments made was that ARP funds can be used. If you're going to use ARP funds to construct a new hospital because it's healthcare related, why can't we say that the same ARP funds can fund for the safekeep of the current hospital, because that's healthcare related too, right? They're both healthcare related. So I don't really think the argument has been made deep enough or strong enough to use the ARP funds that our colleagues are saying is there and should be used for immediate use of what GMH Administrator wants to do, the panel box and so forth. It's nice we do this, but I would have to object to this, and I would rather see if we're going to use additional ARP funds, if available, after OFB gives us that green light. Then I would like to see it put into things like the custom facility, where we don't have one, where the customs officers can look at all this cargo coming in a secure, sterile facility with an X-ray machine. So I appreciate the intent of the author wanting to do this. However, I feel that if there's additional funds, I'd like to see it go elsewhere. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment. On the amendment, Speaker Chalahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. If the funds are available, of course, and we're waiting for OFB to confirm that, then this is a critical legislative decision. What is our priority? And I'm very confident that, having looked at the Army Corps of Engineers list of things that need to be done at the hospital, that this $5 million and the conservative amount that we were estimating for the labor and delivery ward, I think that's quite conservative, that these funds might or will be necessary if we are to accomplish these critical needs, which include the labor and delivery ward and the electrical panel. And as we've seen with almost every project that the government has planned to do, for example, Simon Sanchez, the costs have just risen so much higher than the original estimates that the original estimates have become almost obsolete. And so I support the additional money, that if there is additional surplus revenues, that it go towards the Guam Memorial Hospital. And I ask my colleagues to do the same, that we focus on the Guam Memorial Hospital at this time, this fiscal year. Sidos Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment. If there's no one else, Senator Nelson, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your support and for the dialogue. The labor and delivery ward needs essentially 13 to 15 million. So if you try to pass a $10 million amendment, then there's no real justification other than getting your name in a press release. And so that's why we're looking to ensure that there's equity for both, for the flexibility for the administrators to act on the needs of the Guam Memorial Hospital. One argues that you can use ARPA funds for certain things. Well, you can use ARPA funds to build a custom inspection facility. You can use federal grants to build a custom inspection facility. So, I mean, if one can cancel out the other, then it's moot. And so really, what we're doing is addressing the immediate needs today, and we've seen it. We've seen it in social media. We've seen it in our news media, that these are currently our healthcare challenges. And in response to COVID-19, the whole world was able to see a shortcoming in healthcare. And so what, are we going to turn a blind eye and not invest in our healthcare now that we're clear from COVID-19? Or are we going to learn our lesson and to improve and build upon it? And so that's why I ask for your support to ensure that there's this money there so that we can really truly start to invest in our healthcare. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Before I call for the vote, there was a request for information. Senator Snoguestein, do you have the answer?
Oh, yeah, I have a general answer to the request. If this amendment passes, we could be looking at under $2 million left. All right, just my colleagues, just be mindful of, as we were adding on, and based on that count, when I say under 2 million, it's because we have to account for any shortfall in the special funds. And the shortfall in the special funds is about $9 million. So we have to minus all of that as we're moving. It's a moving target right now. So if there is an amendment that comes up that we don't believe the funding may be there, I will make that statement during the amendment introduction. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Snoguestein. Senator Nelson, since there was a point of information that came after your closing, I'll go ahead and let you
Thank you.
add to that.
And so it's very clear that there's already a calculation to ensure that the shortfall in the special fund is also projected. And so this amendment will still be able to hold and to cover that shortfall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, there has been an objection. All those in favor, again, this is the amendment to the amendment as amended. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Again, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries. Now, on the amendment as further amended. Anyone on the amendment? Senator Moylan? If there's no one else on the amendment as further amended, Senator Moylan, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues, for the discussion and the amendments made to this. Let's hope that this does assist, and that as the budget bill moves forward, gets to the governor's office, it is executed, and actually the money provided after the audit is performed. So I thank my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment as amended, are there any objections? This is on the original amendment by Senator Moylan now. Any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on SB 276 JCM2 L11 P149. That's line 11, page 149, introduced by Senator Jim Moylan, Section 41, Architectural and Engineering Design for the Customs Satellite Inspection Holding and Secured Sterile Facility Area. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also wish to thank my co-sponsors of this amendment, to include Senator Atta, Senator Duenas, and Senator Blas Jr. The amendment, everybody find the amendment? Are we okay with that? Okay. It's Section 41, Architect and Engineering Design for the Custom Satellite Inspection, Holding and Secure Sterile Facility Area. The amendment reads that no more than $2 million from the audited surplus revenues from the fund balance of 2022. So again, we're using the audited version. That we're going to appropriate this to the Customs and Quarantine Agency to authorize for the purpose of the architect and engineering design of the Customs Satellite Inspection and secure facility, sterile facility area pursuant to the public law, which is 3612. And the funding for the appropriation is coming from Section 40 of the chapter, shall supersede the appropriations in Section 41. Well, basically what we're doing is similar to what we did with GMH. We're using audited surplus revenues. And we know the struggles that the Customs and Quarantine has had in getting their facility built since their last one was, they were kicked out of. So presently, they do the best they can and inspect which ones they can based on the manifest, and they also had a roving truck that kind of did what they could. But CQA leadership has expressed their strong support in getting this facility built. And it was just recently we had to go back in another bill, which became public law, to extend the property that the Port Authority had provided for them to build this facility because nothing has been done in the period that they had to at least break ground and do something with it. We've had several public hearings about this, including the last one held in August 24 of 2021. Now, the primary benefit of this facility is that it would greatly assist in reducing the number of illegal drugs entering our island through the seaport. We know these drugs are coming in through the seaport and through the port, and to the airport, through our mail. And considering the increase in criminal activity on our island, we can see that many of these acts are somehow associated with illegal drugs, and the functioning facility is greatly needed to stop these drugs coming in. So in the past 4 years, we've seen dramatic reduction in the cost of meth. We've heard many people say it was once at this high price, but now this is where you should come and shop for it. It's unfortunate, which is just further evidence that the supply of drugs on the island is there and readily available. And as noted earlier, the A&E is just the first start to get this project going. So this process alone would take some time to get completed. So hence, this would provide our government ample time to identify the funding source to finally get this project completed. So let's just start on the A&E. Let's get going. With that, I just hope and my colleagues will support this amendment, as it's a major step forward in addressing the serious case of drug importation and, of course, keeping our community safe. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment, Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I want to clarify a few things because our sponsor of this amendment had made some statements that the Customs was, I guess, essentially thrown out of their previous location where they did these type of inspections, and that's not the case. I was at the Port Authority at the time, and the reason the facility that they had as part of the port's modernization plan and the investment of the federal government in the expansion and upgrade of the port to address the military buildup is the reason why the Customs did not have a continued use of this facility to do their inspection. They were given the use of one of the warehouses, and they did have a cage that they maintained there. So, that's a misrepresentation that they were just left out in the cold and these type of inspections that they were not able to provide these type of inspections. The Port Authority also assisted Customs through the port security grant in obtaining the van that they have going around to do these type of scans on these containers. But as we're finding, and as we did in the hearings with Customs, such a small percentage, and I don't know why, because it's Customs that determines which containers at the port are to be pulled out for this type of essential drive-by inspection, and there's such a small percentage that's ever done in any single year. So, I'm sure we can see the benefits, hopefully, of building this facility, and hopefully they're going to do the type of inspections, and hopefully the biosecurity concerns that we have will also be addressed that have been laid and not addressed in the past. We've had many opportunities where Customs has had to board a vessel 3, 4, 5 times after they've cleared it time and time again, only to have port employees find additional issues, and then Customs will come back once again, over and over again, to do proper inspections, even on board vessels. So hopefully this will address it. But at the same time, this issue of drugs coming into the port, I mean, I've also seen a number of press releases as recent as an individual being arrested at the port for having drugs on their possession and claiming that, oh, this is not something to the effect that this is, an isolated incident and drugs are not coming through the Port Authority of Guam. So if we're going to believe the current management down there, I guess drugs are not coming through the Port Authority of Guam. But I think there would probably also be a need to be invested in scanners. And they do have scanners that have been that are available that can scan 100% of all containers going out of the Port Authority of Guam. And perhaps that might be a better investment if you want to determine what's actually in these containers, with the hope that the customs official that's working there is on the up and up and they're not letting things slide. Because as I mentioned time and time again, who's watching the fox that's watching the hen house? The most recent, in recent years, what happened and who was indicted and who was convicted of being involved in the movement of illegal material were customs officers. And I'm sure that's not reflection of the majority of customs. I'm hopeful that they're above board, but unfortunately that's just what happened. That was the reality. So I think we just need to be mindful that we don't gloss over these issues because this is what we've heard versus having firsthand experience in dealing with this. So I don't object so much about the need for the facility. I'm a little concerned that we're running down the amount of money that's left. That concerns me because I know that what we're putting forth, while important, is not the begin and end all of the needs of this community that we're going to have moving forward. And if projections, which is very possible, are not going to continue at the level we're experiencing, where we can continue to appropriate money left, right, up and down, jump over the next log in front of us, we're going to be coming up short, and I don't know where we're going to get the money or where we start cutting. So I just think we need to be mindful of that as well. But I don't think the building of this particular facility without 100% scanning or having scanning equipment, my goodness, American Samoa has bigger scanning equipment than the Port Authority of Guam. And if you've ever been there, the amount of containers they have could fit into this lot of where this legislature is sitting. It's nowhere near the size of the Port Authority, and that's probably something that I think would be even more effective. If we want to talk about the importation of drugs, I think that might be a more effective means of addressing it, where there's 100% scanning and there's not the discretion of customs to determine which containers get inspected and which containers don't. Because goodness, almost, probably 90+% of the containers that come through the port are probably never inspected for this type of concern. So I just wanted to add that because I just want to make sure when we're making these statements there's some sense of accuracy with regards to that presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From my understanding in the amendment, that the Port Authority of Guam has assisted Customs and Quarantine Agency with the write-up for them to avail to federal grants for the A&E and also for the build. And so according to the latest appropriation count, I don't think that this is a prudent amendment to put forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, Senator Titagui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I guess when I was doing my tally, I had an additional, little more than what the OFB had announced on how much funding is left. And right now, I'm surprised this amendment is even now being brought in front of us, knowingly that there is not enough funding right now to cover it. I mean, it's one thing to sit here and start spending excess revenue that was brought to us through a CRER report. We still have a couple more months to go. And to now start spending money we don't even have in front of us, it's irresponsible. So I'm going to have to object to this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. On the amendment,
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
The bill says audited amount. If there's no money, then there's no money, right? If there's $1 million, it says up to $2 million. So the statement that it's irresponsible, I object to that statement. And basically, it's an audited amount of money. What is ever available could be assistance up to the $2 million mark. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Point of information,
Thank you, Senator
Mr. Chair.
Moylan. Senator Titagui.
My comment was based on what we have in front of us in the current CRER report. I mean, everybody is following the same numbers in the current CRER report. We had an additional $24 million for the month of July We are down, we've expended almost all of that 24 million. That's what I'm talking, whether it's audited or not, we should not be, funding amendments that are still, in la land or don't even know how much is there. We have been following a number that is based on documents from BBMR showing us how much is there. So just a point of information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tadegui. On the amendment, Senator Torres.
Mr. Chair, I rise in support of this amendment, and I thank the 4 sponsors of this amendment for bringing this proposal forward. Throughout this process, we've had days and days of appropriations towards projects that we felt were priority projects or very important and worth funding in the event that there are surplus revenues from the audit performed on fiscal year 2022. Many of the amendments and the appropriations had to do with what we felt were issues that dealt with the life and safety and quality of life for our citizens on Guam. This amendment in particular is geared towards a project that has been identified as a must-have for Customs and Quarantine Agency, a must-have in their efforts to curb drug importation, to fight against the illegal import of goods into the island. And much effort has gone through in the past legislative sessions to identify funds, to work with them on a plan of action to help them secure their machines and help them procure dogs, for example, drug-sniffing dogs. So if truly our efforts are towards the quality of life in Guam, curbing the drug epidemic on Guam and the importation of illegal drugs and goods into Guam should be top on our list as well. And with that, dedicating $2 million from audited surplus revenues is sound, it is prudent, but if we're especially worried about what is happening on this island with regards to drug infiltrating our island, with the ability of our Customs and Quarantine agents to be able to safely, responsibly, in a contained facility, inspect cargo, then this is the sort of project that will enable that to happen. So with that, I support it. It's $2 million. We've been appropriating left and right throughout this budget hearing. I mean, throughout this budget bill session, we've been appropriating left and right for these sorts of contingencies. So I think that this is one of those that I certainly would like to, knowing what we're faced with on this island with the state of our health, the state of our drug addiction, the state of our ability to just take control of our lives again. This is one measure towards helping those officers who try to curb the importation of those items that have such drastic effects on our livelihoods. So I support it. I don't see, I mean, as the author pointed out, in a point of information, at the end of the day, whether they meet the mark and the surplus funds add up fully, then so be it. If they don't, then that's another task for this body to take up and to appropriate monies where we can. But looking ahead, I don't see the harm in it. And so I support this, and I thank them for thinking about Customs and helping them to realize the design for their new Customs satellite inspection holding and secured facility at the Port Authority of Guam. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. On the amendment, Speaker Chalahi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, of course, agree that inspection and customs being a priority is critical. My concern is that, when we did have a hearing on the bill that is very similar to this provision that's being proposed to be included in this budget, you know, that at that time, Customs was working with the port on the grant, and we've heard from the oversight chair of the port that supposedly that is in progress, and that should allow Customs to pursue grant funding for this, what happened? For facility. At the time, they also talked about pursuing funding from that they had funding from the Edward Byrne grant. They were going to pursue funding from the opioid settlement that the Attorney General has brought in that are specifically allowed to be used for drug-related, for curbing drug use on Guam. And then we had talked to them about the infrastructure bill, and they said they would be pursuing that with the clearinghouse. And so, and then we talked to them about their ARP funds at the time, which they had been allotted $3.5 million, and they had only expended $277,000, so they had $3.2 million balance of ARP funds. So it seems to me that they might have already resources available to them to pursue these things. And yeah, I guess I'm just trying to put it together in my head that we did hear from the OFB chair, Finance and Budget chair of the legislature, that I think according to their calculations, we have used the predicted excess revenues already. And just considering all of those things together, Mr. Chair, so that's all. So of course, if there is other funding available to Customs to pursue this project, I think that's what they should do. If there is no funds available to Customs, then that's why we had to consider excess revenues. But I think that it's been made clear on the record that we might have exhausted the excess revenues, and that it is incumbent on Customs to pursue all the funding that they said that they would pursue. And if the port is assisting them clearly to get this facility built and to pursue that grant, then I think by all means that we should pursue that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment, Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Listening to the conversations here, and if I can ask, the General Lady from GIGO, she made mention that to the effect that the intent for this amendment is for the purposes of the architecture and engineering design, and there was some comment about that had been completed already?
Senator
I will
Nelson
yield.
yields to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, that's incorrect. What I said is that they received assistance from the Port Authority of Guam on their write-up so that they can pursue the federal grant for that.
I truly apologize. I could not hear the response.
Senator Nelson, could you speak into the mic?
Well, for the purposes that I appreciate it, if you can give me a 30-second recess so I can go up to it.
We'll take a moment's recess. Okay, we're back from that short recess. Senator Blas, were you able to clarify?
Yes, I appreciate it, and I thank the, the good lady from GIGO and with regard to the information. And I guess it's my understanding that the Port Authority was assisting Guam Customs and Quarantine in being able to put together a grant for the same purposes and stuff. And so I just needed to make sure that that was clarified. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas. On the amendment,
Just
Senator Moylan?
point of information on that. Yes, I recently, just last week, I believe it was Friday, I was on the phone with Vince Parrish, the chief, and we looked at those. Is there any possibility of the infrastructure bill or the grant? And he said the grant didn't work out. The infrastructure bill, they were mentioned, but nothing has worked out. Here we have the opportunity to give audited amounts just for the A&E of money we're hoping would still be there. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moylan.
Point of inquiry.
Senator Nelson.
What does it mean by it didn't work out?
Senator Moylan, do you yield to the question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. They don't have it. It failed. They don't, first, the grant did not work. They didn't get it. And the infrastructure bill is still in discussion. There's nothing there that they have learned that they're going to receive money for the infrastructure. It's a possible discussion, but their total cost, we're probably looking at 20 million. So that's why the 10% is just for the A&E. There's a lot more money needed that possibly when these things do happen in the future, that it would help support them completing the structure they need to have their x-ray machine inside, to include the other agencies like agriculture and DRT to look at used goods, use tax and agriculture for invasive species in there as well. So we're just asking for up to 2 million of audited funds just to do the A&E. Any other further money coming in from the federal government, that could be for that purpose. But right now we have a possibility of audited amount. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Nelson.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. Perhaps those that are working together are not collaborating because, from my understanding, it's not $2 million, it's $1.5 million that's needed for the A&E, and that there has been a write-up for them to avail to the federal grant. And it's ambiguous to say that the federal grant did not work out when we received nothing as the oversight chair informing us that the federal grant and what specific federal grant that they availed to did not process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment? Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Moylan, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate your assistance in moving this as one step forward for our Customs and Quarantine to assist them in inspecting the cargo that comes into our island. This facility, or this is one step for them to get the facility that would house also revenue tax to collect use tax on goods that we may not be catching, and also agriculture to help protect our island from invasive species. It's one step that we can do through this audited amounts, and hopefully there is money available at that time. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I also, if I can throw in a motion just to add Senator Mary Torres as a co-sponsor to this amendment as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the first motion to add Senator Torres as a co-sponsor, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. On the amendment, are there any? There has been an objection to the amendment. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. That's the final amendment for Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is now closed. We'll take a moment's recess and make sure we have the amendments in order for Chapter 14. Sorry, let me come back on real quick just to clarify. The chair misspoke. That was chapter 12 that was closed. I apologize. Chapter 12 is closed. Now we'll take a moment's recess and prepare for chapter 13. Okay, we are now on Chapter 13. We are in Chapter 13. The first amendment, or Chapter 13, is SB 276 JCM L9 P153. That's line 9, page 153, amending the requirements to apply and qualify for the Recovery, Income Support, and Empowerment, or RISE Act of 2020, proffered by Senator James Moylan. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So basically, our amendment is amending the requirements to apply and qualify for the Recovery, Income Support, and Empowerment. In other words, the RISE Act of 2020. We're doing a couple of things, and that's the income threshold for the individual return and joint return of recovery income of the RISE Act shall be identical to the household threshold of the Programa Salapi 3 that was established by our governor through the executive order. As well as, basically what we're trying to let the governor know through this amendment is adjust the threshold. Going back, as we can recall, there's a Public Law 3653, and that was passed on August 31st, 2021, by 13 senators of the Guam Legislature that voted to override the governor on once Bill 7536. So it's almost 1 year ago. That became Public Law 3653. That's called the RISE Act. And then we understand, of course, the governor created the All RISE Act. And this All RISE Act was a culmination of a couple of legislatures, and it's all started off with Senator Regine Bisco-Lee in 2020. And then we modified it, the 36 modified the program and increased the payout to from $800 to $1,000. And we also simplified the process. But it was kind of ignored, and we recall, some of us may recall, the runarounds a lot of families had, and heartbreaking individuals that parked for hours in their cars, and only to find out it was like a first-come, first-served basis. But we have a problem, right? We still have Public Law 3653, which is the RISE Act, which the governor never implemented. The governor, through executive order, created the All RISE Act. That doesn't mean you can overlook the RISE Act. There's a lot of people that were left out, and the crisis affects, we understand and we see it, everyone on our island, and especially impacts the working class. It's even more detrimental that many of them haven't qualified for other programs introduced, even though the governor, the administration has introduced a lot of programs, but the middle class has been left out. So here we are doing the Programa Salapit 3, and we can also apply that same threshold to the RISE Act. So that's basically what this amendment is doing, Mr. Chairman, is amending the RISE Act, putting it into this bill so that governor can enact it and start paying out based on the Programa Salapit 3 that they have done. So I appreciate my colleagues' support for this, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment, Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe the author can answer this question. If I understood what you said, she used executive order, she didn't address the public law. So how does this work out? If it's not public law that drives this and it's through executive order, I don't think we have the authority to tell the the governor what to do in executive order. That's her call. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're not promoting, I mean, you know, I'm not against the amendment, but I just want to make sure we're not promoting that, no, she should follow this when that's an executive order. If you were the governor and you gave an executive order, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to sit here on this body and say, no, you follow what we have on public law when you didn't apply it. So I just want to make sure that we're not doing anything that doesn't mean anything. It has good intention. You striked out on page 2, the 40 and 80,000. The same thing on page 3. And you raise it to equal the threshold of program Salapi. What is the amount on program Salapi? Because I don't know. I know I didn't qualify for any of those programs out there, or most of us didn't qualify. So I'm just curious because I do want to find ways to support the middle income. But if this is her program, maybe just convince her to increase it herself. And if she's using ARP money, she's or ARP funds, she's following whatever directive she's got from the U.S. Treasurer on what is the threshold, not ours. Because I know for a fact when this was introduced with Senator Regine Besco-Lee, we were backing this all the way, and the RISE Act came out from the executive order. It didn't come out through public law. It was implemented through executive order. So I'm just curious, how does this affect anything? We're just changing the law, amending the law, but it has no power to push. So I'm just concerned with the author. If you might want to explain it, or if not, we could just move on. I'm comfortable with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The author will yield to the questions.
Does the author yield to the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, thanks to colleague for the question. Yes, we overrode the governor's veto, 13 votes to get the RISE Act passed. Yet the governor didn't introduced the All RISE Act based on an executive order. I think this body did influence the governor by recommending this and continuing to imply that this needs to be done. That doesn't mean that the governor can overlook the RISE Act. This bill wasn't rescinded, or it's still public law. And I think that this body could help assist the middle class by looking at the threshold that was increased with the program Salapit. And like, for example, the increase would go up to, for a single person in a household, the one person earning the income can be no more than $3,900 a month, or almost $47,000 a year. So none of us senators would be included in this. However, it should be pointed out as the voice of the people in the co-equal branch of government that we would like to see, and as the original RISE Act was written, if general funds are not available, right, then use the ARPA funds. So it's the same influence, just by asking the governor to increase the threshold to the program Salapit 3 to provide further assistance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator San Augustine.
Mr. Chair, we'll just continue because I'm just looking at this document to strike out the threshold. I don't know what the threshold is now. It's a guessing game. When you strike it out and you don't replace it with something, there's no threshold, there's got to be a threshold. There's no open season when you're talking about the rise. And if the intent is to make sure that there's no threshold, I don't know where the fund's going to come from this. And you can't use the excuse, use the ARP. No. It didn't work that way when the public law was passed. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone on the amendment? Anyone else on the amendment? Speaker Chalahi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask what the fiscal impact of this is. There's no amendment attached to it, and so what is the amount that this would increase what was previously allocated? What amount are we looking at for this, if the author would yield?
Does the author yield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. Thank you, colleague, for the question. But the amount we wouldn't appropriate because we're not in charge of ARPA funds. The funds are available because we know how much remains in ARPA funds. We're basically requesting to the administration to do the same thing that she has done for Program Salapit 3, to increase the threshold for the RISE Act, which is still public law. We're basically amending the public law. The governor, as we saw in the All Rise Act, started out with 30 million. And then that increased after the comment was made that first come, first serve, and then it ends on that date. It's extended. So we thank the administration for doing that. But I believe it went up to 36 million, and just recently it was all paid out, so which is a good thing. So likewise, enact or implement now the RISE Act using the same threshold, and the funding is not through the general fund because we know we can't afford to do that. The funding will be like originally in the RISE Act. If general fund cannot have the money to do that, which it's clearly we don't, then you utilize your authority to use the American Rescue Plan funds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moreland. Speaker Chalahi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That actually didn't answer the question. The question is how much, not the funding source. The bill provides, and the original law and the amendment provide that, of course, the governor can use federal appropriations to pay this, or fiscal year 2021, and this amendment adds fiscal year 2022 and fiscal 2023 general fund appropriations. And this looks to me to be a significant amount that might be mandated to be paid by this act, and I think it's incumbent that we know that amount at this time before we approve this, because they're going to be taking it out potentially of 2023 general fund appropriations, which we think we have fully appropriated already, and that means that we are going to be running deficit budget. We're going to be running short in whatever agencies that money was supposed to go in the first place. And this doesn't say excess, it says any of the appropriations. And the amendment increases the threshold, which I like. It's just that, I'd like to know what the impact of that is, because we're raising the income threshold, so higher income households are going to be eligible. And then my other question would have been, we're using the program in Salapit as the example of how to make them eligible by income, but the program in Salapit was an income per household, whereas the original RISE was an income per tax filer. Very different, apples, oranges to me, and this language that says, however, the payment of the RISE Act shall be made to each filer within a household based on the qualifications of that household's size and total income. I'm not sure that's so clear because, like I said, it says the income thresholds shall be identical to the household threshold of the program in Salapit. And yet, you're going to pay each filer within the household. So if a household qualifies, every filer within that household will be paid. I wonder if there's any way we're even going to be able to estimate this. But, I do agree with the intent that if RISE money, additional RISE money is going to be made available from ARP, that it can be done because the Programang Salapit income limits seem to have been acceptable under the ARP program, and thus should be acceptable under any other program based on income eligibility. And I like that we expanded if this expands it to middle income, as previous speakers have said, that's good. I know the legislature has made its efforts to try to give relief, to all taxpayers, regardless of income, in utility relief and the relief from fuel taxes, so that they can get relief on gas, at the pumps. So expansion of eligibility, meaning those making even additional sums, making them more eligible. I have no objection to that. I just would like to know that if we are continuing to put general fund appropriations on the line for this program, that we should know the amount. If we're going to force the use of ARP funds, of course I have no objection to that, absolutely none. And I support the expansion of that program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Talahi. On the amendment, if there's no one else on the amendment, Senator Moylan, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues, for your comments. The whole idea is basically we want to help the people and get more money back into the people's hands. Here is a current law that was not implemented. The administration did implement their version of, and I'm thankful for. There's ARP money still available. This is a way, we're talking for the people's house, to say, then utilize what knowledge we have learned and how we've grown to help people with the All Rise Act. Now use that same information and help more people with the amendments and what we're doing with this right now during our budget process. So I thank my colleagues and I ask for their support and hope it's favorable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. On the amendment, are there any objections? There is an objection. All those in favor of the amendment signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are now on SB 276 TTT L3 P157. That's line 3, page 157. This is an amendment proffered by Senator Tello Taitagui, line 3, page 157, General Fund Transfer Authority of the Magahagan Guahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I offer this amendment to restrict the governor's general fund transfer authority from 15% to 5%, as we established in the current FY2022 budget, Public Law 36-54. Rather than eliminate Section 8, I propose that we reduce the transfer authority threshold to 5% so that we can ensure that the governor continues to have the flexibility to transfer funds as GovGuam's financial conditions warrants. I believe that maintaining the 5% transfer authority during FY 2023 will be sufficient, as BBMR directors shared during the opening of this year's budget session that with only 2 months left in the fiscal year, the governor has yet to utilize her transfer authority. Again, can I repeat that to my colleagues? BBMR directors shared during the opening days of this year's budget session that with only 2 months left in the fiscal year, the governor has yet to utilize transfer authority. Mr. Chair, this amendment recognizes the governor still has, as of July 2022, as an ARP report that was placed out this is the July 2022 ARP report, $303 million, which remains available should the pandemic recovery efforts require additional resources, or if the artificial economy we're currently in worsens in the weeks or months ahead. Mr. Chair, this amendment recognizes the governor still has, as of July 2022, this funding available of $303 million. Mr. Chair, this amendment doesn't stop the administration from working with this legislature going forward to appropriate funds as needed and as funds, including excess tax collections, are realized, which are done for LEAP and most recently for the new GPA credit program. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. This branch of government, the legislature and this branch of government has remained conservative in our approach in budgeting these past several years. Because of our responsible approach, our government continues to be in a stronger position to hold the line on spending and create more relief programs for our family. Mr. Chair, we've gotten through FY2022 without the governor using the transfer authority. And if we did the math on this, the 5% of the general fund, what she has still left appropriated to her, since it's almost $1 billion at this point, is quite a huge amount, a big amount. So I don't think that we're tying her hands at all when it comes to giving her the ability to do any kind of transfer, especially with that $303 million sitting in the account at her discretion, not ours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I ask my colleagues, please support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. On the amendment, anyone on the Titagui amendment? Madam Speaker, you are recognized.
I support this amendment. I'm not sure how 15% got into the substitute bill, but 5% is what we gave them in FY 2022, not been used yet. I think it's maybe an advantage for the legislature to limit it to 5% in FY23 as well. And if the need arises to transfer greater than 5%, which is still significant, then all they need to do is ask. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the amendment, anyone on the amendment? If no one else, Senator Titagui, you may close. Any objections to the amendment? There's been an objection. All those in favor?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if there is an objection, then I would like to close.
You may close.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, once again, what is different in FY22 when we gave the 5% compared to FY23? There's really no huge difference that we have to give 15% transfer authority to the governor. She received the same in 22, and still, Mr. Chair, wasn't even utilized. I'm not sure why anybody would want to object to something like this when the governor has our funding of $303 million sitting around for her at her discretion. I'm not quite sure. But I do know that in this government, there are 3 branches of government. And the one thing that we have to remember, that there are the checks and balances in this government. We are the checks and balance. Now, I can see, Mr. Chair, if any of us saw that the governor was needing to transfer money from one agency to another and it was done constantly throughout the year, then I can see there was an issue. But I asked my colleagues, we've been good, we've been conservative. In the last 3 budgets that I've been involved with, there has never been an issue with the governor's transfer authority until now. So I ask my colleagues, please remember that. Let's maintain that conservativeness and provide the checks and balance needed in this government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. On the amendment, there was an objection. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We will now take a moment's recess. I believe the next amendment is being rescinded and replaced, so we'll take a moment's recess to ensure everyone has the correct amendment. Okay, we are now on SB 276 TCN L9 P161. This is proposed by Senator Nelson, line 9, page 161. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment reads, notwithstanding any provision of law, rule, or regulation, the Guam Economic Development Authority shall negotiate to all Guam healthcare institutions, both public and private, to establish a new special qualifying certificate program through the issuance of QC incentives to all new and existing facilities that provide medical and operational obligations with the intent to entice further investors to further meet Guam's healthcare needs up to 100% tax rebates and/or abatements. The provision shall expire at the end of fiscal year 2024. So really, I understand that there is one clinic, to my knowledge, that has a QC program in place, and it seems that it has been a very selective operation on who we give QCs to. And in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we asked our healthcare community to stand up and be at the front lines and help us to protect us from this global virus that was that proved to be fatal to many, I thought of this provision to implement to help our clinics rebuild from the challenges that they had, and so that they can negotiate with GITA to receive QCs. Colleagues, I humbly ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment. Anyone on the amendment? Speaker Chalahi, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize the intent of this amendment and as a, a tool to help attract, healthcare facilities that we might need on Guam, that we absolutely need on Guam. The issue that I have is that this is a very generally written amendment. I think it requires the bill, and to be frank, that will flesh out how we exactly give QCs to those particular investments that we very much need. In other words, that we prioritize QCs, even towards healthcare, to those that we need, so that we don't give QCs for areas that we've already got, covered, and that we actually focus on those that we need to entice. And so, it says in here, investors to further meet Guam's healthcare needs. I agree with that, but they're not fleshed out in this bill. And for that reason, I would suggest that this, I'd object and require that this be, it's a QC. And it doesn't say, in fact, which ones we're going to, what are the benefits of this QC are going to be, and so many more details that I would think needs to be done through a bill. And even, so that even GITA can give their input as to which benefits they think are we should allow in this QC. Is it all taxes or just some taxes? And is it for any facility that provides medical and operational obligations? That's what it says here, or those that we really, really need on Guam, Mr. Chair. So, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Teitigwe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the intent of this amendment, but without a fiscal note to tell us what the impact will have on our general fund if we were to do this, because this is not just all new facilities, but as well it says existing facilities. Existing facilities. So there's going to be a huge impact, if. So I too have great reservations with this. I'm looking forward to a bill that would come out to actually address it and to bring all those stakeholders to the table to discuss how we can even, incorporate this into our Guam Code annotated and make sure that it doesn't substantially affect our tax base at this point. So I too have reservations. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tadegui. Anyone else on the amendment? There's no one else on the amendment. Senator Nelson, you may close.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's very clear that it's for anyone that's operating. This is really the intent to help our clinics and perhaps other private hospitals to be built and to cover 100% tax rebates and or abatements for Guam's healthcare needs. So some of our challenges today is that we're unable to bring healthcare specialists to Guam. Some of our challenges today is some clinics go above and beyond their scope. And so usually they pay out of their own business to serve the people of Guam beyond the scope of what they're really meant to do, because it is needed to treat those that are dealing with some ailments. And so it's just up front, let's give them a QC. So colleagues, I humbly ask for your support.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, there has been an objection. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Yeah. Okay, we are now on SB 276 JB, page 166. This is page 166, Senator Joanne Brown. I apologize, I have the amendment out of order.
Yeah,
Let's take a short recess.
No
Let me make
problem.
sure my amendments are in order. Okay, at this time, I understand the AV department needs to reset, but also it's around that time where I think we should go ahead and take a dinner break. We will recess until 6:30 PM.